She's just a parasite. No job, no income, just living off my son like a leech. That was the last thing Bianca heard from her mother-in-law before the judge slammed the gavel and awarded Paul full custody of their daughter Emily. Imagine sacrificing your entire career to build a home only to be tossed aside like yesterday's trash. One minute you're reading bedtime stories, the next you're holding back tears as your child walks away, her little hand in someone else's. That day Bianca lost everything, but what no one saw coming was how she'd rise. If stories of betrayal, strength, and healing speak to you, don't forget to like this video, leave your thoughts below, and subscribe for more powerful real-life journeys. Bianca once had it all, or so she thought. A rising star in the media industry, she was sharp, creative, and admired by her peers. But when she met Paul, a polished, successful finance executive, her priorities shifted. They married quickly, and Bianca stepped away from her career to become a full-time mother and homemaker. She poured her heart into building a loving household, believing her sacrifices would be appreciated. But behind closed doors, appreciation was the last thing she received. Paul's mother, cold, calculating, and obsessed with appearances, saw Bianca as beneath them, a woman with no real value. Her poison seeped into every corner of the marriage. Over time, Paul changed. Bianca's world slowly shrank from vibrant boardrooms to silent kitchens, from creative meetings to PTA bake sales where whispers followed her. She smiled through it all, convincing herself this was what love required. Until the day Paul filed for divorce and took Emily with him. No assets, no support, no child, just shame, silence, and a court order. But that wasn't the end of Bianca's story. It was the beginning of something no one in Paul's family ever expected. Before Bianca could rise, we need to understand just how deep she had fallen and how the very people she trusted most quietly tore her down. Bianca didn't always feel invisible. There was a time when her voice commanded rooms, her ideas won pitches, and her energy drew people in. In her early 20s, she was quickly making a name for herself at a fast-growing media agency in Chicago. Everyone from interns to executives recognized her spark. She worked late, delivered more than asked, and never missed a deadline. Bianca was the kind of woman who wrote her own future until she fell in love. Paul had the kind of presence that turned heads. Confident, calm, successful. He listened to Bianca in a way no one else had. He said all the right things, promised a life built on partnership and support. When he proposed, her friends warned her not to give up too much. But Bianca believed love was about sacrifice. She left her job to focus on starting a family. It was supposed to be a temporary pause just until Emily was old enough for preschool. But that pause stretched and stretched. At first, Bianca found joy in motherhood. Emily was bright, affectionate, curious. Every morning felt like a gift. But slowly, things began to shift. Paul became distant, his praises replaced by cold suggestions. Maybe you should contribute more. Other moms manage side hustles, you know. You're just not ambitious anymore. Bianca was stunned. Didn't he see she cooked, cleaned, managed appointments, organized birthdays, handled the bills, kept the house running like a machine? But none of that counted. Not to Paul, not to his family, especially not to Diana, Paul's mother. Diana made it clear from day one that Bianca wasn't a match. She'd say things like, "It's a shame Paul gave up on dating lawyers." Or when guests visited, she'd comment loudly, "Bianca's working so hard being unemployed, always with a smile, always in front of Emily." Bianca tried to hold her ground. She hosted dinners, dressed the part, played the polite daughter-in-law, but Diana only dug in deeper. Behind the scenes, she whispered doubts into Paul's ears about Bianca's mental stability, her lack of drive, her unsuitable parenting. Paul began staying later at work. He stopped talking to her about important decisions. One morning, Bianca found out from a neighbor that they'd refinanced the house, something Paul never even mentioned to her. She confronted him. He accused her of being paranoid. The emotional distance soon turned into silence, and silence turned into control. Paul changed passwords to financial accounts. He insisted Bianca didn't need that kind of stress. Then came the small humiliations, cutting her credit card limit, tracking grocery expenses, questioning why she needed yet another dress when she wasn't going anywhere. Still, Bianca stayed. Not because she didn't see what was happening, but because of Emily. That little girl with the wild curls and soft voice was her whole world. Bianca told herself that as long as Emily was safe and loved, she could endure anything. So she smiled through Sunday dinners with Diana, accepted the icy stares, and went to bed alone more nights than she could count. Then came the betrayal she never saw coming. One morning, after dropping Emily at school, Bianca came home to find a man standing in her driveway with court papers. Paul was filing for divorce, and he was seeking full custody. Bianca was numb. Her hands trembled as she read through the documents. No warning, no conversation, just done. When she called Paul in tears, he calmly explained that it was what's best for everyone, especially Emily. And then Diana twisted the knife. During the custody hearing, Diana took the stand and painted Bianca as unstable, lazy, unfit. She testified that Bianca was often overwhelmed, prone to emotional outbursts, and unable to provide structure. Paul's lawyer argued that Emily needed stability, something only Paul's new job, his new environment, and his supportive network could provide. Bianca's lawyer fought, but it was a losing battle. With no income, no assets in her name, and no documented abuse, the court sided with Paul. Bianca lost her home, her car, her daughter. That night, she sat on a friend's couch clutching Emily's stuffed rabbit. The house was quiet, too quiet. Her chest felt hollow. How had it come to this? She wasn't angry at first, just broken. The kind of broken where you question your worth, your voice, your place in the world. She thought about giving up. But then, she remembered the look in Emily's eyes during their last court-supervised visit. A flicker of hope, a quiet cry for help. That was the moment something cracked inside Bianca, not in despair but in resolve. She would not be the footnote in Paul's story. She would not be the absent mother her daughter remembered with confusion. She would rise. She would build. Not just for herself, but for Emily. And so began Bianca's quiet, relentless journey back to power. No one believed she could do it. But they had underestimated the one thing no court could strip from her, the heart of a mother on a mission. But every comeback begins with a moment of radical change, and Bianca's came from the most unlikely place. Bianca's comeback didn't begin with a grand gesture or a dramatic announcement. It began in silence at 3 a.m. in a public library with free Wi-Fi and a half-empty thermos of cold coffee. She had nothing but an old laptop and the will to reclaim her life. She started small, researching online courses, watching lectures on child psychology and emotional development. The more she read, the more she realized something gut-wrenching. What had happened to Emily wasn't rare. Emotional neglect, isolation, gaslighting. So many children experienced it, yet few had the language or safe space to name it. It was like a light turned on in Bianca's mind. What if she could build that space? Not just for Emily, but for thousands of children who couldn't speak up. She scraped together what little she had and enrolled in night classes. During the day, she waitressed at a diner, then took shifts cleaning houses in the suburbs. Every dollar went toward textbooks, therapy workshops, and online certifications. Friends offered spare couches and secondhand clothes. She swallowed her pride more times than she could count. But her dignity, that was rebuilding one late-night study session at a time. Bianca began sketching out an idea for a digital platform, a place where kids could explore emotions through stories, art, and games. She wanted it to be more than just educational. It had to feel like play, but with impact. She called it Heartbridge. She worked tirelessly teaching mindfulness, emotional intelligence, and storytelling in community centers and schools. Word started to spread. Her warm, authentic approach stood out in a space dominated by cold metrics and generic content. Slowly, she built a team: educators, child therapists, tech volunteers, all women who had also been dismissed, overlooked, or belittled. Together, they launched the beta version of Heartbridge. And then fate handed her something unexpected. 3 years after losing custody, Bianca was invited to speak at a regional education conference in Boston. Her topic: helping children find their voice. It wasn't national, it wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. She poured everything into that presentation, data, stories, heart. After her talk, a representative from a major public school district approached her. They wanted to run a pilot program using Heartbridge in 5 elementary schools. Bianca could barely breathe. This was it, her crack in the wall. But she had no idea the most explosive part of her journey was still ahead. 2 months later, Bianca received an alert from the Heartbridge Analytics dashboard. A cluster of flagged responses came in from a suburban school in a different district. The platform's emotional tracking system, a tool designed to help teachers identify patterns in student mood, had picked up several consistent signals from one child: withdrawal guilt and coded language about being a disappointment. Bianca wasn't supposed to investigate individual cases, protocols and privacy laws were strict, but something gnawed at her. The child's name: Emily W. Her heart stopped. Bianca's hands trembled as she checked the location. It was Emily's school. She had no idea Emily's district had adopted the Heartbridge pilot through a third-party program Bianca's team had licensed. It was sheer coincidence, or divine timing. Through formal channels, Bianca flagged the concern with the school counselor and stepped back as protocol demanded. But she couldn't stop thinking about it. Then weeks later, she received a phone call. It was a teacher from the school, one who'd seen Bianca's conference speech. She recognized the name and reached out privately. "She's withdrawn," the teacher said. "Polite, smart, but guarded. I think something's wrong at home." Bianca's heart shattered and swelled at once. Her baby girl was in pain. And this time, Bianca had tools. She didn't call Paul. She didn't confront Diana. She called a journalist. The next move was strategic. Bianca launched a quiet campaign through Heartbridge's Parent Alliance. She didn't name Emily or Paul. Instead, she released anonymized case studies highlighting what happens when schools ignore patterns of emotional neglect. The content went viral. Then came the public statement: Heartbridge would file a legal petition against the school, not Paul, citing negligence in handling repeated emotional red flags. The press latched onto the story. EdTech platform exposes emotional abuse patterns in affluent suburb. Overnight, Bianca became a lightning rod for advocacy. Paul was furious. He called her, yelling, demanding she drop the circus and stop dragging the family into the spotlight. She hung up on him for the first time in her life. As pressure mounted, Emily's school opened an internal investigation. Multiple students stepped forward. A concerned counselor conducted a full evaluation. Findings showed Emily displayed classic signs of emotional manipulation and psychological control. Bianca remained silent. She knew better than to confront the system head-on. She was playing the long game. But then something extraordinary happened. Emily, during a school art therapy session hosted by Heartbridge, painted a picture. A tall glass house with a girl inside, smiling on the outside, but tears hidden behind her eyes. On the roof, in red crayon, she wrote, "I want to go home." The therapist asked what home meant. Emily whispered, "My real mom." The floodgates opened. A full forensic psychological evaluation was ordered. Paul's carefully curated facade began to crack. Teachers came forward, neighbors shared observations. Diana tried to intervene, but the era of whispers and manipulation was over. The case went back to family court, this time with real evidence. Bianca walked into that courtroom not as a heartbroken ex-wife, but as the founder of a nationally recognized emotional wellness platform. Her legal team, backed by experts and public support, laid out a detailed timeline of Emily's emotional decline under Paul's custody and the systemic failure that enabled it. Paul tried to cut a deal behind closed doors. Bianca refused. She wasn't here for peace. She was here for justice. And what happened next in that courtroom would not only change Emily's future, but exposed the darkest truths the family had fought so hard to bury. The courtroom buzzed with tension the moment Bianca stepped inside. Reporters filled the back benches. The air felt thick-hot with anticipation, outrage, and whispers. Paul sat stiffly at the defense table, jaw-clenched fingers tapping nervously against a leather folder. Diana was seated behind him, composed but icy eyes scanning the room like she was still in control. Emily wasn't present, not yet. Bianca had insisted she only attend when absolutely necessary. This was about protecting her, not parading her. But Bianca wasn't just fighting for her daughter anymore. She was standing for every woman who'd been told she wasn't enough. For every mother erased from the story because she didn't bring in a paycheck. For every child taught to smile while silently screaming for help. The judge entered. Silence fell. Bianca's attorney began with a simple statement. Your Honor, this is not a story about divorce. This is a story about coercive control, systemic negligence, and a mother who never stopped trying to protect her child, even when no one believed her. Then came the testimony. A licensed child psychologist took the stand first. She had conducted 3 separate evaluations of Emily over 6 weeks. Her findings were clear and harrowing. Emily exhibits strong signs of chronic emotional suppression, fear of retaliation, and an internalized belief that her voice is dangerous, the psychologist explained. These are hallmarks of sustained psychological manipulation. What's more troubling is the consistency of her silence. She's been taught that telling the truth equals punishment. Paul's attorney objected, but the judge allowed the full statement. Next came the Heartbridge data. Bianca's team presented anonymized logs showing patterns of distress that had gone unnoticed by the school. These weren't just feelings, they were quantifiable, trackable symptoms of emotional harm. One graph showed how Emily's emotional responses improved during her brief contact with Heartbridge's art therapy program. The contrast was damning. Still, the opposing side wasn't backing down. Paul's lawyer painted Bianca as unstable, ambitious, emotionally manipulative. She's using her daughter to build a business empire, he said coldly. This is exploitation under the guise of advocacy. Bianca stood up. Your Honor, may I speak? The judge nodded. She approached the bench, heart thudding. I built Heartbridge because of what happened to Emily. Not to profit, but to protect. And if speaking up makes me look ambitious, then good. Because being silent made me invisible. And that's how children like Emily get hurt. There was a murmur in the room. For a moment, Paul looked shaken, but Diana leaned in, whispering something into his ear. He straightened his spine. Then came the moment Bianca would never forget. The judge called a recess, but when they returned, the bailiff informed them that Emily had submitted a written statement with the help of her school counselor and therapist. It had been delivered in a sealed envelope reviewed by the court-appointed child advocate and was now admissible. The judge began reading it aloud. I love my dad and Diana, but I feel like I always have to be what they want. I don't know what I want anymore. With my mom, I feel like I can be me. I don't feel scared. I don't feel wrong. I just feel safe. I miss feeling safe. A gasp cut through the room. Paul shifted in his seat, eyes darting. For the first time, he looked like a man on the verge of collapse. The judge ordered a brief recess to consider the testimony. Bianca stepped into the hallway to breathe. That's when Diana followed her. You think this changes anything? Diana hissed. You think a few tears and a crayon drawing make you a better mother? Bianca turned slowly. Her voice was low, calm. No. But they make me a mother again. Something you'll never understand. Diana scoffed. We gave Emily everything: money, security, education, and still she clings to your pathetic sob story. Bianca stared at her, the years of humiliation boiling just beneath the surface. You never gave her love. You gave her a cage and called it a castle. Security stepped in before it escalated further. Diana backed off with a glare, but the damage was done. The press had seen it. The next day, judgment was delivered. Bianca was granted full custody of Emily with supervised visitation rights assigned to Paul. Diana was banned from contact pending investigation into emotional endangerment. But that wasn't the end. The judge also issued a formal statement to the school district and child services. Heartbridge's tools would be reviewed as potential instruments in broader emotional safety screenings nationwide. Bianca had changed the system, not just her life. Still, the victory didn't feel clean. Bianca knew Emily had scars no ruling could erase. Trust would take time, healing would take even longer. And Paul, once the man who convinced her to give up everything, had been reduced to a broken shell behind a courtroom desk. As Bianca stepped outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters called her name. She didn't speak. She took Emily's hand, who'd arrived just moments after the verdict, and they walked away together. Silence this time wasn't a prison. It was peace. But the real turning point wasn't the courtroom. It was what came after, when Bianca faced a terrifying question. How do you rebuild a life with a child who barely remembers what it means to feel safe? The victory was official, but Bianca didn't feel victorious. In the weeks after the verdict, the noise died down, reporters moved on, the hashtags faded, and Heartbridge, though gaining traction nationally, no longer shielded her from the sharp edges of real life. What lingered wasn't the taste of justice. It was the quiet uncertainty of what came next. Emily moved in with her full-time. That first night, they sat at opposite ends of the dinner table, spaghetti cooling between them. Bianca smiled gently, but Emily kept her eyes on the plate. The little girl she used to braid hair for now flinched at her touch. Years of absence had created a canyon that love alone couldn't jump. Bianca spent hours in silence after Emily went to bed, replaying every decision she'd ever made. Had she been selfish to fight? Could she become the mother Emily truly needed? Now not just a savior in court, but a safe space in everyday life. One morning, Bianca found Emily curled up in the corner of her room, clutching an old stuffed animal from her baby years, the only toy Paul hadn't thrown out. "I didn't think you kept this," Bianca said softly. Emily didn't look up. "I kept it hidden. They said it was childish." Bianca knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, being a child isn't a flaw. It's a gift. And you never have to hide that with me." That moment cracked something open, a tiny fracture in the wall between them. But rebuilding trust was a marathon. Emily struggled with nightmares, withdrawal, sudden panic. Bianca tried therapy, journaling, play-based healing. Some days worked, some didn't. But Bianca never gave up. Then came the unexpected reunion. At a charity gala for child emotional wellness, Bianca was invited as a keynote speaker. She hesitated at first. Public attention now felt like a double-edged sword. But when Emily encouraged her to go, whispering, "Maybe people like hearing stories like yours," Bianca knew she had to. The event was elegant, filled with professionals and donors and policymakers. After her speech, raw, honest, deeply personal, Bianca stepped off stage and was approached by a woman in her late 60s. Stern eyes, stylish clothes, but kind smile. It was Mrs. Hallberg, Bianca's former manager from the media company she'd left after marriage. The same woman who once told her, "You're wasting your light on someone else's shadow." "I watched the whole thing," Mrs. Hallberg said. "You know, I always wondered what happened to you. I thought you disappeared forever. But here you are, louder, wiser, and forged in fire." Bianca chuckled through the emotion tightening in her throat. "I thought I had to choose being a mother or being someone." Mrs. Hallberg touched her shoulder gently. "You were always someone. You just needed to stop apologizing for existing." That line hit hard. Later that night, as Bianca watched Emily sleep peacefully for the first time in months, she sat on the windowsill, that sentence echoing, "Stop apologizing for existing." She realized something. All her life she had fought to be enough for Paul, for Diana, even for Emily. But now the fight had shifted. It was no longer about proving herself to others. It was about living a life where she never again asked permission to matter. The next morning, Bianca made a decision. She turned down a lucrative offer to sell Heartbridge's model to a major corporate tech firm that wanted to streamline the platform. They saw it as data. She saw it as sanctuary. Instead, she partnered with a group of grassroots educators and therapists to create a network of local emotional safe zones in underfunded schools. Then she took another leap. She registered for a graduate certification in trauma-informed parenting and child development. She wanted to be not just a founder, but an expert, not just a mother, but an anchor. Emily noticed the shift, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet ones. "How come you don't work as much now?" she asked one night. "I still work," Bianca replied with a smile, "but I finally learned that being strong doesn't mean being absent." Emily crawled into her lap, something she hadn't done in years. "You're not like other grown-ups," she said. "How's that?" "You listen, and you remember things that matter." Bianca didn't respond right away. She just hugged her daughter close, heart finally beating with peace instead of rage. She had chosen not vengeance, but value, not bitterness, but boundaries, not proving herself, but protecting what mattered most. And it all started with the decision to believe she was enough, even when the world said otherwise. But with healing comes consequence, and as Bianca's work begins to reshape the national conversation, not everyone is happy about the power she now holds. Bianca didn't need revenge to taste sweet, she needed it to be strategic. With her platform now officially endorsed by a coalition of national educators, Heartbridge became more than a nonprofit. It became a movement. Schools began implementing her emotional safe zones. Parents flooded her online forums, seeking guidance, and children started telling their stories. Some raw, some small. Some heartbreaking, but all heard. Then came the inevitable backlash from those who'd built their power on silence. Paul's company, once flaunting its family values reputation, faced pressure from internal boards and external stakeholders. When Bianca's case resurfaced in an investigative article linking emotional neglect to corporate culture, Paul was called into a private review. His new wife, once praised for her polished image, quietly scrubbed her social media presence of any mention of Emily. Soon after, Diana, the matriarch who once hissed, "You'll never be anything without my son," was caught on camera, confronting a school counselor during a protest against Heartbridge in her district. The clip went viral. Her sharp voice cracked. "My family doesn't raise victims." The internet's response was swift and savage. Thousands commented, "No, just kids too scared to speak. This woman is the reason Heartbridge exists." Sponsors pulled out of Diana's charity fund. Her name became synonymous with denial and generational toxicity. Bianca, meanwhile, was invited to speak at the National Summit for Child Well-Being. She stood tall, her voice steady, not angry, not vengeful, but rooted. She ended her keynote with a message that reached every person who had ever been silenced. When society tells mothers to disappear, to not take up space, to quietly endure for the sake of family, we lose more than identity. We lose generations. I chose to fight not out of rage, but out of love. And I'll keep fighting until no child fears telling the truth. The audience stood clapping not just for her, but for every unheard story she now represented. And as Bianca finally stepped out of the shadow of her past, she realized that her greatest legacy wasn't just winning her daughter back, but creating a world where her daughter would never have to fight the same battle again. Bianca now lives in a quiet home nestled near a wooded lake, nothing extravagant, but everything peaceful. Emily stays with her full-time, and their evenings are filled with music, laughter, and long talks that once seemed like distant dreams. There are no more hushed phone calls, no more forced smiles at court-mandated visits. Just truth, just love. The woman once dismissed as a nobody, as a housewife with no future, has become a national advocate for emotional education and children's rights. But more importantly, she has become a mother her daughter trusts freely, wholly, without fear. Bianca's journey wasn't about revenge in the way her in-laws might have expected. It wasn't about destruction, it was about rebuilding, brick by brick, heart by heart. And that's the message she leaves us with. Your worth is not measured by what others allow you to be. You define it, protect it, and live it. And sometimes the strongest act of love is refusing to be silent. So if you've ever been underestimated, mistreated, or made to feel small, remember Bianca. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, or even tell your own. You never know who might need to hear it.